How we doing? Okay. I'll stand out of the direct way of that thing and maybe it won't squeak on us. So I thought I'd just cover a little bit on sort of some of the real basics of early development, and then try to take on the question of water use and what's happening so far with water use, because as everybody knows, it's a water critical year. There just isn't enough in many areas to go around. And I'll tell you about a program that we're doing right now. I've got a small users group of cotton drip irrigation folks that we're talking about scheduling irrigations. We have some regular meetings and doing some things with internet, email, contacts, that kind of thing, to talk about irrigation scheduling and irrigation management in drip irrigated cotton. So if you want to be part of that group and interact with us, we're doing plant monitoring, we're doing some soil moisture monitoring, leaf water potential readings, that kind of thing. Let me know at the end of the meeting, and we can talk about how you might get involved with some of that program. As you know, we've been doing drip irrigation in cotton for many years, but interestingly enough, we've seen, just even over the last few years, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of drip irrigated cotton. And that's simply because our infiltration rates in soils largely control surface irrigation. So I'm looking in the field here, and it looks like a fantastic field, but we want to ask the question in terms of efficiencies of the system. Is what we put on in this irrigation going to match what the crop water use was to this point? Because most of us are going to pre-irrigate. We want a fairly full soil moisture profile. Certainly the top couple of feet we want filled before we even start planting. So we want to make sure that gets us to our first irrigation. And most of us pre-irrigate, but then we have this stored moisture in there. We draw down that stored soil moisture until the point where there's that break in equilibrium, where the root system, as it continues to develop deeper and deeper in the soil, sort of gives way to the fact that it can't grow fast enough to get down to deep water. And now our days are heating up, and look at the size of the canopy now. We're starting to get a fairly good sized canopy, which can actually start drawing a lot more water. So depending upon where we're at in what kind of soil types, and we've had warm days, extremely warm days over the last month or so. We've had blowing winds earlier in the season and continuing through the later part of the season. What can we expect in terms of our first irrigation volumes of applied water? And for some people with surface irrigation, we can see as much as 7, 8, 9, 10 inches of water being applied to a quarter mile run, let alone a half-mile run, because the infiltration controls how much water you're going to put. You can't put water fast enough down the field to reduce that much. And so that's where drip irrigation situations have come in. Sprinkler irrigation is a lot more common, as you know, with not only the pre-irrigation, but with that first seasonal irrigation. So one of the questions we want to ask is, how much water has the crop used to date? And that's why I put together this little handout here, and I've got the table, that table on the, we'll call this the front page. And I've got some numbers up here, and at the top I have April 15th to April 30th. And basically I just wanted to summarize there about since planting, what our crop water use would have been to that point. Well, there's the rule of thumb that I use. I like to use the Simis irrigation sites to help determine that. And basically what I did here is I wanted to compare 5 points in Firebaugh, just to give you an idea of what location differences might play in that equation. And then I used a KC. And the KC, because of some of the work that we've done looking at ET, using what we call surface renewal systems, any correlation that will actually allow us to look at vapor moisture moving out of cotton fields, we set a crop coefficient of about 0.2, which is basically a background level it's basically soil evaporation. That's where you see that KC at 0.2, and then increasing as that plant gets taller, as it gets there's more of a canopy, we begin to increase that crop coefficient. So you see that 0.2 there, and then you see the ET in 5 points, or ETC, which is ET of the crop, and then next to it in that final column on the right, ETC and fire cloth. And we do see some differences there early on. And then they're magnified as we go down to the bottom of the column. If we look at the total water, the total ETO for those two different sites, we see 14.84 inches in 5 points and 12.15 inches. So if we had a full canopy, if we had a, let's say alfalfa mimics our cool and warm season grasses that are planted at these CIMA sites. If we had alfalfa or a full cover canopy crop, we'd have somewhere between 12 and 14 inches being used during that period of time. Obviously, we're not using that much water out here. But what we are using is somewhere between about 3 and 4 inches of water. So you see the fire cloth there, it says 3.09 or about 3.1 inches of water post-plant. Okay, there was some evaporation prior to that after a pre-irrigation, but that gives us an idea of how much water we've lost. And then 3.74 inches at the 5 points location. So roughly we're looking at 4 inches or less of water being evaporated or transpired since we pre-irrigated. That's about what we can count on in terms of replenishing soil moisture at this point in time. So that gives you a little bit of an estimate, an idea of what we've done in terms of crop water use to date. Now, let's go to the back page, back sheet here, and in the middle, I've got a crop coefficient or a KC. I've got a couple of them out there, and there's an upper and lower KC, and I've got points A, B, C, D, and E. So basically, this is what we're using to estimate what that canopy curve is, what that looks like. So it's fairly flat. You can see that A to B point is fairly flat. And again, we're not growing, that canopy is not growing very rapidly until about B. And B actually coincides very closely with about first square. And as we get, now we've got about three or four squares on here, we're really starting to ramp up our water use. And to take you back to page 1 there, look at how the KC has changed, going from 0.22 in late May to we're estimating in this field June 5th being almost 0.5. So we're really beginning to rapidly increase the amount of water that basically that crop is using. Okay, and that's why you're seeing a lot of irrigation scheduling going on. Our crop water use is so great right now that the plant cannot keep, those plant roots can't keep a rapid enough growth to tap into deep moisture. And so that's why when the plant stress levels go up, we move from leaf water potentials of about -10, -12, they start to head up to -15. And that plant stress is what we want to control at this stage. We want to see that crop continue to steadily grow at a steady increase. Premature irrigation is going to cool the bed down. It's going to slow the plant down. Irrigation too late, we're going to see that stress build up, and the plant growth rate is actually going to reduce very rapidly over a short period of time. So that's finding that balance of first irrigation time. From what I can see, growers are doing a real good job. Dan, you made a specific decision to sort of hold off a little bit in this field in particular, and I believe there's a couple reasons for that. But could you kind of give us a sense as to why this might be a later field compared to some of your other fields?
Well, we just held off on the water because it was growing so quickly. Yeah. And then actually when we put on the application of that carbine, we actually put in 3 ounces of kicks on it also.
Okay.
That's something we put in to make, just to try to slow it down. It seemed like it was just growing too rapidly.
So I went out and I did a little bit of digging out here before we got started here. I didn't have my soil logger with me because my technician has that this morning, but I wanted to at least give you an idea of down. Oh, that's all dried out now. But the point here is that this I pulled a sample from about 2 feet. We've got roots already throughout the 2-foot zone. Now, here's the tap root that I was able to pull, and if you look at that, that's from a soil depth standpoint, that's just about 16 inches for this thick root, but down at about 2 feet, we're seeing a lot of these fine roots. So the soil's being exploited well into the 2nd foot, and actually there's probably a fair amount of water beginning to come out of that 3rd foot already. So this little short plant there, don't be fooled into thinking it's not tapping into some good deep moisture. And of course, that's what you want to see. That type of a tap root right there gives you a real good idea that you've got some good expanding small fine roots around and down below this. Okay, so it's a good looking tap root. Had this been a root that was sort of sometimes you see this, it hits a compaction layer, or for whatever reason you don't see a good strong tap root. That's what you look for in terms of expanding or drawing that soil moisture down deep. So if you're not able to, obviously, and you don't have a good tap root, it's going to be an early irrigation for you, isn't it? And then And then the point is, down at 2 feet, as I dug down there, you could not ribbon that soil at all. So there's good moisture coming out of it. The plants, like you say, Dan, it's in great shape. It means it's tapping a lot of good deep moisture. Now, are you doing any pressure bombing on the field here? And what are we seeing so far?
Over there, we first checked it. We were only like about 10 results. We held off like another 8 to 10 days. I think it was up to about 14.
Very good. Very good. So here's a grower. Not everybody does this, but especially early in the season like this, being able to check your leaf water potentials right about that time of first irrigation is a great way to use that pressure chamber. It helps you initiate, it helps you get started, and it gets that cycle going for the rest of the season. Sometimes we sort of just start running around after that, just trying to get around to all our fields, and other things control irrigation schedule. With this first irrigation, having that pressure chamber can be a really useful tool. Now, the other point I wanted to make about these crop coefficients, this will apply more so to drip irrigated fields, but I want to just kind of make the point that some soils have high water retention, some soils have low water retention. A sandy loam does not have the water retention that a good clay loam does, and a heavy clay does not have as much as a clay loam soil does in terms of water retention. The plant has to work too hard in that heavy clay soil to pull some of that moisture out. So while it has a lot of water in it, that plant has to work a little bit more to get it out. So there are differences, and so what I've got with coefficient, the top coefficient and the bottom coefficient in the light colored soil is those are two crop coefficients developed based on soil water storage differences in the soil. So this is what we're using to estimate our ET on different soil types. Is the crop coefficient. It looks something like this. Now, the top coefficient, the tall one up here, is that going to be used on a high water storage soil or a low water storage soil? Oh, come on.
Where you're high.
Well, we're applying more water to this top one. That means that we don't have as much stored soil moisture. So either we didn't fully apply our pre-irrigation, or we're working more with a sandy loam. We don't have as much to store, and so we're actually applying more water on that top one because of the lower storage. In some of these good deep clay loam soils like this, Dan, you'll probably pull moisture down to 6 feet this year before you harvest. You're going to have pretty good, right at the end of the season, if we talk, late September and defoliation time, you're going to have a fair amount of water taken out down as deep as is 6 feet.
Yeah, but our water table's pretty high around here.
Okay, there you go there too. So that's going to be something else you factor in there. But the point that you've got all that stored soil moisture, in some cases that could be up to 30% of your ET during the whole season. So you don't need to apply as much water. You're going to mine that water later on in the season. You want that plant at the end of the season to go into slow but steady stress, so that your defoliants will work well, so that your plant shuts down in a timely manner. You're not still flowering. You're not still pushing that growth real late in the season. So you want your crop coefficients to coincide with the level of plant water stress that you're trying to impose on the plant, and to do that, you need to manage that carefully through the season. And so your crop ET curve is not going to look, the full crop ET curve is going to look like a plant that's using 28 to 30 inches of water in most seasons, but your applied water curve is going to look different, and that's why we've got lower numbers expressed here in this bottom graph here. Those are ET or applied water values, and ET expected, where we expect the applications to go on at a lower rate throughout the season. So we're not putting on, during the season, we're not putting on 28 or 30 inches of water. We're putting on 28 or 30 inches minus whatever that stored soil moisture is. Anything else we want to talk about? Or did some people get into a situation where they felt like they were getting just a lot of early stress and really needed to get that water on early? And if so, what kinds of situations were those?
Yeah, we had, the wind just beat up a lot of stuff and had some sick looking roots for different reasons, and just seemed like better get water on.
Yeah. So some of the tap roots didn't look quite as nice as we did here. Probably saw a lot of it was.
Not like
Yeah. Was it? Do you think compaction played a role at all in any of that, or is it just mainly the fact that you had the plant itself wasn't producing enough to build that root system?
it could be that it could be temperature at planting. It could be the wind took moisture away faster.
Yeah.
A combination of both. But once they started growing, it was not very helpful.
Yeah. No, and I think that's really one of those key elements as you're making that first irrigation decision is really take a good dig in there and see what things look like. You probably have a field history where you know where some of the tougher areas of the field are, and those are ones you want to also go to and make sure that you're evaluating. What does that root system look like in that area versus maybe some of the stronger areas of the field. But absolutely, looking at that, digging a little bit and looking for roots where they're at, where they're not at, oftentimes will give you a real clue as to whether or not you should be putting that water on a little bit early.
He's here. You better take advantage of it.
Well, like I said, we're doing more drip irrigation these days. If you have some questions about how to time some of those drip irrigations, or you want to get involved in this little users group that we're pulling together this season, let me know, and we'll be happy to work with you. It's a real interesting crop and a real interesting point in time where water is in some areas it's a third of the input costs or more for some of these systems. So those how much you apply when. Growers more and more are looking at deficit approaches, ways to deficit irrigate without hurting the crop yield too much. Those are the things that some of the questions that we've tried to answer over the years and had a little bit of experience with. So, Pete.
Quick observation. Dan and I were at a meeting last week with Conservation Tillage. Gary was there. Some of the other folks might have been as well. And what we were looking at out on Knees and I-5 was essentially a tomato production with cotton rotation. So there were 60-inch beds with a center drip line. So two things came to my mind today, Dan. One of them was going back to Steve's talk. where you have those plants, I'm assuming they're not going to close up those rows at 60 inches, right?
Eventually they will, absolutely.
Eventually they will?
Yep.
But meanwhile, you've got a lot more potential weed issue
Absolutely.
that Steve mentioned earlier.
Yep.
So it's this kind of constant balance of, and then and Steve was also talking about moving away from minimum till to get in there and at least scratch the surface. So now we're talking about trips across the field. And so we seem to be having these, push and pull kind of situations with us. With being able, if you do go with a drip, you've got to be able to move it into your system. And Gary, you're starting to think about a little bit of that with some systems on yours with cotton. We're thinking about it, yeah. So it's a whole engineering kind of a thing, but it's also this, we want to be building our soils, of course, but how do we do that when we're trying to manage, we have to rely on Roundup Ready varieties that now we have to really, really watch the herbicide resistance at that point. So I only bring that out because of these, I didn't want to add to that, but I mean, it was a very interesting field, and what I hadn't thought about when we were out there was it looked so good. I wonder what it's going to look like later on. But of course, he's in a cotton tomato rotation. He can rotate into some other herbicides and vice versa. So I just bring that up as a point of discussion.
Well, there has been some interest. It's interesting that as many years I've been a cotton farm advisor, we haven't heard too much about the interest in 60-inch cotton until the last several years. And we did get a little bit of work with Work Farms there over the last few years, and we had some mixed results. We had some situations where we actually did some replicated block work, large-scale block work, and found that 60-inch. In one of those years, there was very little difference. It was hard to tell any difference between yield on a 30 versus a 60-inch system. In another year, it was very different. But the problem with that year was that the reason why there was 60 inches, they didn't get a good stand on the 30, so they came back, and they came back a little bit later and then replanted over the top and turned their drip irrigation system on those 60s, and then they got the plant up that way using the irrigation system, so they didn't have to go back out and lay pipe and that sort of thing because they didn't have good moisture. That created a late planted condition, and then we ended up seeing actually some fairly high losses because of low ligas counts on a 60-inch bed. So that year it didn't work out so good. So there, we've had some mixed results, but people like Bill Carvalho here and others have been trying to work in these systems to see if they might be high-yielding systems, slightly lower crop water use because you're not early season in particular this time of year. That crop coefficient isn't going to go up quite as rapidly. It's going to have kind of a staggered delay, and then it's going to take much longer to get to where you have peak ET. But we actually did fill in those beds probably maybe 10 days to 2 weeks later than say a 40-inch bed. So it wasn't that great of the plant really does compensate, right? We had lots of fruiting branches, and we had a lot of vegetative branches, those branches down below, that if there isn't a really good light, or if there is a good light environment, they just sort of turn on. And so we had lots of late set fruit that compensated, that used all of that sunlight by the end of the year, compensated for that per plant production, and there's a good potential for high yielding systems there. But how far you can take that north because of the delay that you have with the cooler temperatures, what are the issues with some of the pest management things that we just talked about, including some of the weed control issues, and you got a longer period of potential weed control issues. Those are all things that really we haven't worked through that system, but certainly something that we can continue to look at if it's going to fit the growers' system and costs and the economics.
Dan, can I just make a comment?
Sure.
The part that'd be interesting too, to me, is that just like if you were making a shift in the other direction, like 10 years ago, we had a lot of people experimenting with some narrow row and ultra narrow row.
Yeah.
The cultivars that are available that you want to use will have a big impact on probably what you'll see with some of these systems. So
Excellent
again,
point.
the ideal cultivar to use for a a single row 60 is probably very, very different than what you'd want for, like the double row 30s that they've done up north of here, or some other kind of conventional thing. So, there'd be some interesting things to play with there, just in terms of cultivar differences.
Very good. Determinants, determinate versus indeterminate cotton types absolutely is going to, that is absolutely an important part of that mix between whether or not vegetative growth can actually accommodate that kind of a system. A more determinate plant type in a 60-inch bed, for instance, you're not going to get some of the compensation that you might want to have. And similarly, the irrigation scheduling you may want to be tweaking that a little bit as well, based on what type of system you're working in. Thanks for your attention.